maybe, and not to break.
You can say, ask anything.
So I think what may be interesting to the audience is when a judge is presiding over a matter, especially a matter that has constitutional implications, what are some of the things you think about in terms of competing interests, and how does that decision-making process happen? I think it'd be fascinating for us to hear how that...
It is, the ordinary interpretation of the Constitution dominates. Obviously, in any situation such as this, there is a subjective element.
Yeah.
There are those who seek to give to restrictive interpretation to fundamental liberties, to those of us like me who get broader interpretations to what the Constitution says. But, the interpretation of the Constitution insofar as the fundamental rights are concerned, so as far Chapter 2 is concerned, there isn't much debate. There is the subjective debate as to whether municipalities can restrict gatherings, whether they can find out where your money is kept, what constitutes slavery, slave labor. Now, that may sound strange to others outside of this country, but here in the Western Cape, there was a system on the wine farms where you got paid not in monetary terms, but with bottles of liquor or tots of liquor for the day's work. That is known as the tot system. Now that's the Fonset origo of forced slavery on the wine farms. But today in various different manifests itself in very different ways. It's a very simple also proposition that the most illiterate people are those working on farms.
Yeah.
They've had centuries of oppression. They're not, still to this day, not well educated. And of course, I need not say this is the most unequal country in the world. So your peasant farm workers are the least protected. So that sort of servitude will come up. If I was still a judge, I would deal with that sort of matter if it came up before me. There's also the issue of citizenship.
Yeah.
Citizenship in this country. How does one interpret that? Where does South Africa end and Zimbabwe start? I mean, are these false demarcations of nations?
Yeah.
This is not, even in Europe for years they spoke about national entities. Before that, Europe was also one big space with different people occupying it. People speak the similar language in north of this country and in Zimbabwe. Lesotho is very much bound up in the destiny of this country. This country collapses, Lesotho collapses. Swaziland is a monarchy. What's constitutional monarchy? Where do you get a constitution? In the 21st century. So our struggles and their struggles are continuing struggles. So citizenship is an important one, and it's important today because some political parties arrogate themselves the right to be called political parties, go around singling out people who may not be of South African origin. Now that sort of thinking, that sort of action is offensive to those of us who grew up in the struggle years. We fought for freedom in this country, and we fought for this constitution. We fought for the right of citizenship and the right of people to come here if they qualify. So, I mean, it's not something that we should treat lightly. It's a bit frightening what is happening in this country, but we're dealing with it. But the point I'm making, it's protected by the Constitution.
Yeah. Judge, can I ask a question around, when you talk about, or when we think about citizenship and we think about South Africa as, people refer to our borders being really porous. And, we sometimes hear that our borders are not tightly controlled, and therefore the movement of people from other Southern African countries into South Africa happens really easily. But there's a bigger implication for do so-called foreign nationals who live in our country, what are their rights in terms of the right to access to education and healthcare and those things?
That's not a legal question, that's a political issue.
Okay.
It's fundamentally a political issue to decide who can come into country, who can't come in this country. My own view is that all of Southern Africa is one, and that there should be freedom of movement, certainly in Southern Africa. Not because I am a citizenship and have always been a citizen, but because it's a logical outcome of what is happening here. We can't spend our lifetime hunting down people who may or may not be born in South Africa, may speak a different dialect, but basically speak the same language. I think the world must move beyond boundaries. The world should, it's not simply a position I'd adopt in South Africa, it's a position that's been adopted throughout the world.
Yeah.
That boundaries are false boundaries. And we should defend the right of people to move between nations with qualifications which nations could work out. But that is an important issue. The other important issue that I was going to look at is the political, it's a case that I sat in also. I sat in very controversial cases. Political rights, political choices. Now, in this country, you don't choose a leader, you vote for the political party. I was first stunned when I heard this in my struggle days when I was an activist, that was the proposition that was put forward by the ANC then. It meant, I in fact asked Albie Sachs, who later he came to defend the ANC position here in Woodstock, at the Woodstock branch of the ANC. And he mentioned the idea that we're going to have not people elected to parliament, but parties. And parties would nominate who goes to parliament. In other words, the party would select who the MPs are. So perhaps in innocence, or perhaps in naivete, that I said to Albie, but wouldn't that give too much power to the party bosses? I thought he'll debate the issue. He lost his cool.
Yeah.
He actually became angry but I asked the question innocently. But on hindsight, I think it made sense because we were at all different levels that society was in. It was a society that was, there's no clear leadership. Struggle had been fought in different formations throughout the country. Different political parties had participated in it. And it made sense to have the dominant party being the governing party of the day. What happened before the last election, 3 weeks before the last election, the application came before me to have the elections postponed because individual people, and these individual people, the part of the Khoisan group.
Yeah.
But I think they were fronting for other people. I shouldn't say that. And they then came to me and stopped the election. So how can I stop the election? So I refused to stop the election.
On what basis, Judge? They want to have the election?
They wanted to have elections stopped on the basis that I, as an individual, want to stand to be president of this country, and I can't stand because the individual can't be elected to parliament. You have to be a party.
Right.
Right? So they said that their basic rights contained in this constitution. You see, the very opening statement of political rights, section 19 reads, every citizen is free to make political choices, which includes the right to form a political party, to participate in activities and so on. He said it doesn't exclude a very fundamental right, the right to elect and to be elected to parliament. So I said, now, firstly, how can I stop elections 2 weeks down the road? And secondly, this case has already been decided by Moseneke DCJ as the Deputy Chief Justice in Mars, in which he found that the Constitution envisages a party political system, regulation, not the Constitution. That section of the Constitution is put into regulations, and the regulations envisage a party political system. I gave my judgment within 2 weeks. You can read it, it's available. Right? It's 10 pages long.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very good judgment, I must say. And then They went to the Constitutional Court on an urgent basis.
After you had made
After I'd made
your
the
judgment.
ruling. So a week before the election, it came before the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court, in its greater and lesser wisdom, its greater wisdom chucked out the matter. In its lesser wisdom, agreed to hear the matter after the election to fully ventilate the issue.
Okay.
What the choice I was confronted with was siding with Moseneke or siding with a recent arbitrary remark by the next Chief Justice, Kandimukheng, in which he spoke about that this section may be open to debate. This is the arbitrary remark he made.
Yeah.
Then the matter was heard by the Constitutional Court in August after the election. They reserved judgment for over a year. You know, I gave my judgment in 3 weeks. They reserved judgment for over a year. And then they gave a judgment which says no, that section, the regulations are unconstitutional. And my count votes, my vote counts. The judgment of Mokheng should dominate. They were obviously his court, so they went with him and not with my good friend and comrade Tikhang Moseneke. But you see, we also have friends who are judges. So in any case, they went with Mokheng. That's where all the drama is now unfolding in the country.
I was going to ask, what is the practical?
All the practical implication of that is it hasn't been sorted out yet.
Okay.
It threw our voting system into jeopardy. Imagine if there are 30 people standing or 300 people standing for election.
Yeah, as for president.
For president. And then you'll have a long voting sheet. And not everybody is computer literate to put on a voting sheet the number of people standing. If you put the tariff too high, you say to register, you must pay 5,000 Rand. They go run to the Constitutional Court, say being unreasonable. Now, this is an ongoing debate. I think I was right not to disrupt the status quo, which was functioning. I suspect, should I say so? No, I wouldn't say what I suspect. In any case, the judge, Mokheng, who wrote my vote counts, may be a candidate for the elections. You know, he's canvassing himself to stand as a candidate. I'm not sure whether he is. But in any case, that's how history develops, that's how history unfolds. Every constitution is a product of its time. And every constitution is dictated by the political events that unfold at a given moment. Now, the real point I want to make here is this, that I've told you about the Bill of Rights, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom against right to privacy, your Bill of Rights with regard to bail applications in court, the right to appear in court, that sort of stuff. That's fine. I have no problem with that. We fought for that, we got that. Although I do have some reservations on the opening clause, which deals with how it's interpreted. You know, how they say, but that's an interpretation section.
But Judge, I think that's important because, you know, there's talk of the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. Let us hear a little bit about that.
Just the application, you see, it binds whether it's lateral application or horizontal application. That means whether it applies only to state and citizenship or among citizens inter se. Now, that just leads to a lot of confusion. It's a complicated debate. But this, you see, at some stages, this constitution is the product of lawyers, clever lawyers, good minds. Arthur Chaskerson was a very clever fellow. I know you, I knew him well. And many others who both developed this constitution. But they all, whether positive or negative, they had an agenda. And the agenda was simply to usher in a new order in this country. Now, to usher in a new order in this country, incorporating what we struggle for, your basic rights, that's there. But it's the amount of legalism that goes with it, opens the Constitution out for debate. You know, I appeared in some of the major, and not this judge, You don't know, I appear as major counsel in one of the major criminal matters, in the political, not ordinary criminal matters. And we never had, in this country, there was no discovery procedure in criminal law. You couldn't get the docket.
Yeah.
In other words, you went to court in the morning.
Blindsided, yeah.
We only knew that the client is charged with subversion, asked for further particulars, they answered the further particulars, but we never knew what the witnesses were going to say, or whether they were contradicting each other, or whether the witnesses were to say. When this constitution was introduced, one of the first cases, besides Makiwane, which abolished the death penalty, the system of discovery, mutual discovery, was introduced. And it's so much easier to run a criminal trial. I can assure you, in my days, and Lutfi, you bear me out, I got many acquittals, despite the fact that we were blindsided and fighting on our feet. Now, much easier it is now. We know what the entire state case against you, and all the other liberties that go with this. I don't think the courts are strong enough in seeing the ultimate objective of the Constitution is to protect the liberty and life of your citizenry. And to be able to do that, one must be able to ensure an efficient system of criminal justice.
Yeah.
I mean, I sat in the Van Breda case, you know, the case that the axe murderer. And that case itself took a year, because it took a year because there's complicated medical evidence, scientific evidence, and evidence of blood smatters and all that sort of things that go in a major trial. So I can understand in a case like that running over a year. But it started the day I got the case. I called the counsel in and I dictated the pattern of the case to run. It still took some time. But nowadays, and I'm off the bench now, the cases run forever without starting.
Oh.
Preliminary points, interlocutory points, that sort of stuff.
So, Judge, how does that affect the right to a fair trial?
It doesn't affect it doesn't affect the right to a fair trial. It fundamentally affects the citizenry to enjoy a quick and efficient resolution of criminal default.
Yeah.
One doesn't want to have a criminal trial dragging on forever. The judges are to an extent at fault in that they don't play a strong enough role. And let me tell you what I did. In my lifetime, my short lifetime, judge of 25 years. When I first became a judge, I had appeared in a matter in Belleville courts. The doctor was my client. And he'd been, I can't remember what sort of case it was. And this counsel appeared with me, and he kept on postponing the matter. So, and then he got sick. And then the case got postponed again. I just wasn't starting. And he got sick. And then the case postponed again. And the next postponed date came. He phones me and tells me the most ridiculous thing. It's a prominent attorney in this town. He told me, your turn to fall sick now.
Oh, wow.
I said, what? I didn't tell him that I was already a judge designated. I kept totally quiet. I said, I'll be in court, and whether you're there or not, I'm starting the trial. In any case, the case didn't run. The point I'm making is this: a year later, he appears before me, and he missed an appeal, and he comes to me and he wants to postpone an appeal. So in those days in Cape Town, when it's a year, we had appellate jurisdiction from the lower courts. So I was the presiding judge, the senior judge. So he comes to me and he tells me, you know what, Judge, how are you doing? And I said, no, I'm not available this Friday. I said, okay, when are you available? He opens his diary and he's not available for 4 months.
Oh, wow.
He's obviously available. He's obviously hasn't got enough fees. He wants to collect more fees before he runs the trial. So he tells me 4 months, Judge, August. I said, no, you're available. August, Judge. No. Okay, look at him and tell him, before all courts start, 8 o'clock Wednesday morning, I'll hear this appeal. So you can't be unavailable before the court start. And I said, I'll make my colleague there, well, to be there. He very quickly became available the first Friday. But that sort of chicanery that goes on from criminal, especially the old hack criminal lawyers do it all the time. They undermine the system. And the only way to counter that is not to find weaknesses in the constitution, but to have a stronger judiciary.
Yeah.
Now, the problem nowadays is, and let's be totally frank about this, that some of the judges have not been inside a criminal court.
Mm.
Half the work a judge does, if not more, is criminal work. There's your criminal appeals, there are high-profile criminal matters, and so on. And you see the most ghastly results on television of criminal matters. And I know that the trial is flopping, not because of anybody else, because the judge doesn't know what he or she is doing. So I don't know how one gets around that, to getting people appointed who have experience in all fields of the law. Some of the most prominent trials collapse because
Judge, to
I don't want to mention cases that you know with the judges.
yeah.
You know?
Judge, to what extent is there almost a developmental approach to supporting the pipeline of judges so that they have the right exposure and experience, and they are able to, once they assume the bench?
There is no pipeline. There was at a time in past when the JPs consulted with the judges and we could monitor the candidates. Unfortunately, the reasons which I am not at liberty to speak here seems to have collapsed.
Okay.
So you get the most horrendous appointments to the bench, certainly acting appointments. But perhaps I shouldn't talk of that. I come fresh out of the turmoil of the period, this period.
Thank you, Judge.
I'm still fresh. But now
Yes.
the point I want to make
Yes.
now is that I have to say my other half, you know, when this constitution was approved, the first Minister of Justice was my principal. I was articled to him, and he was my very good friend. Lutfi also knew him. And we were all friends and so on, and he was the Minister of Justice. So I met him one day, and we were at the party. And I told him, we should call him Dala, Dala Umar. I said, Dala, isn't the real effect of the Constitution that it legitimizes the property gains of 300 years of colonial oppression and exploitation? He got so cross with me for even mentioning that notion. But that's overstating the situation. Yeah. I was overstating the problem. He got very cross with me, that's what I'm saying. Because I mean, the thought that this glorious constitution has defects was
it was something that he could.
But the point is, the constitution does have flaws. We incorporated, unlike most constitutions in the world, we incorporate fourth generation rights.
Yeah, and that's
right
very
to water,
progressive.
right to housing.
So, Judge, can you talk to us about that?
Let me just say one thing. Firstly, let me take the position, be quite clear, that those are not simply constitutional rights, but those are political rights. You can't run a revolution and not give those people those rights and say, okay, we'll deal with it in a constitutional court.
Yeah.
The right to water, the right to sanitation are the basis on which a political party campaigns and implements the demands of its time. Sorry, man. Implements the demands of its time. Now, here we have right to housing. Grootboom case, the famous Grootboom case, which Wallace Dean here in Western Cape, written by also a good friend of mine, Judge Jacob. What he did was he gave them a right to housing, and he set up this beautiful judgment on how right to housing is to be implemented. That's about 10 years ago. Mrs. Grootboom, Iris Grootboom, died before she got a house. She did get a house after she died. But how did that assist in providing for housing? No government, no provincial government or national government has adopted that policy. he set out in detail a plan of action how housing is to be implemented. This country is not only the most unequal society in the world, it has the least amount of housing per capita in this country, decent housing, brick and mortar housing. It doesn't have that. You see there's shanties appearing everywhere in shacks. It does so because there is insufficient housing. Now, no grootboom and no constitution is going to give you the right, unless there's the political will to implement that. So the point I'm making is the fourth generation rights are deceptive. I mean, Kader Asmal, when he introduced the water bill, the proud day was that he introduced water. He was right, he did introduce water. But it should have been part of a political demand that every woman, child in this country is entitled to fresh water or basic amount of fresh water. I don't even know whether there should be limitations on that. But they should be entitled to basic water or basic sanitation. And sanitation does not mean pit toilets. Sanitation means running water. Since the days of Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, we've had running water for toilets.
Thousands of years ago.
Thousands of years ago. Although they don't admit that it originated in the East.
In the Indus Valley.
In Indus Valley. Yeah. That's where the first running water. You know, the running water didn't come from the United States, please.
Yeah, and multi-story
buildings. If you look at the architecture of the Indus Valley civilization, and they actually had a sitting platform running water at the bottom. That's the first concept of the modern loo. But besides that, I'm not saying we should adopt that. But in this country, we have pit toilets, which take us even backwards, you know, and there's danger to that, especially. So that sort of right should be a political. You cannot evade political responsibility by saying go to the Constitutional Court.
Yeah. There's a disconnect between a very progressive constitution and the implementation in terms of your right to basic services.
Yeah, it in fact diverts the debate.
Yeah.
It diverts the onus of the debate to the court as opposed to a political party which seeks to govern. If that political party does not govern, was elect a political party that governs to give you fresh water, fresh housing and all the other basic rights that you can talk about. Sorry, ma'am.
Judge, I'm mindful of time and I want to check with Natalie
Can we ask any questions?
We're going to ask questions.
Please.
We want to ask some questions. We're going to see what's coming through online. But while Natalie is checking.
Oh, they can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Right. We can hear you.
We also want our audience in the room to think about any interesting questions they may have for Judge Desai, but I'm going to defer to you, Natalie.
Yeah, so we have two questions. The first is from Janeda, who's dialing in from the States. He's asked, this is about your comments about the borders earlier.
About
the borders.
The borders.
Yes.
But that statement you made about our boundaries, when do you think Africa as a whole will blend our own borders?
Well, certainly in Southern Africa, it will open itself to blending. The barriers in Southern Africa are false. You must remember that all the barriers, or most of the barriers in Africa, came by the colonial disposition. And the boundaries in Africa on ethnic lines are the product of colonialism. So we haven't, by adopting the nation states as they are, we've adopted holus bolus what the colonial powers intended it to be. The division in the Congo, the division among tribes in different parts of Africa, and has led to wars. Boundaries and nation states have led to unnecessary wars in this country. I think we must mature society to the extent that one accepts everybody as a brother and sister and regulate the way in such a way that movement between nations is possible, especially in a country, this part of the world. I mean, as I keep on saying, I see a lot, I ride Uber all the time. And the people who come from Zimbabwe are perfectly suited to be South African citizens. They contribute to this country. Besides contributing, they also have a right. They speak the same language as the people in different parts of the country do. So are people from Swaziland. So these are false boundaries. I don't know how we're going to sort that out. I don't think there's the political will to actually form unions. But we came very close to an actual union with Zimbabwe when President Mbeki was president, and his close relationship with
Mugabe.
Big comrade Bob Mugabe. So they were very close to, very working closely together. But they never, I must say though, they never spoke of an actual union. You know, they never spoke of it merging the countries besides economically, in economic terms.
Yeah,
they didn't have that amount. You see, perhaps my view is a bit too avant-garde on that. That we should actually move beyond nation states. Especially, I'm acutely aware of the fact that the divisions in Africa are the product of colonial dispossession and colonial domination. And more recently of imperialist domination. So one can see that how one can work on that. But look here, I think we must think ahead of time. I mean, I'm not going to stand to be president of this country, neither the intention nor the desire to do so, but I can express my point of view as to what is the most progressive alternative. In fact, those of you familiar with Marxist debates, you know, the European Marxists take the view that the debate about nation states, when Karl Marx thought about nation states, he was talking about the concept of emergent nation states in Europe at that time. But he overemphasized the nation state concept with relation to what the nature of the class struggle should be. I'm talking in his terms. And now with the wars going on in Ukraine and Russia and Germany and this thing, there should actually be a unity of the, I mean, what's the difference between Poland and Czechoslovakia for that? They all look similar, they talk similar. So these also, Europe should also be, one should also look at it, divert the debate from nation states to what is in the best interest of mankind.
Yeah.
Let's put it as mildly as that.
Yes, thank you, Judge. Do we have another question?
Yes, we do. From Joel, he's asked, what would you like to see amended the most in the Constitution and why?
Good question.
That is a very good question. Let me be brutally frank about this one. You know, all the PAPIA clauses, those are clauses which give all sorts of rights to people to ask for litigation. Most litigation against the state starts with the reasons being furnished. Clerks are not trained to do that. The state's infrastructure is weak. It results in enormous amount of litigation against the state. And if you don't, let me just explain that to a foreign audience. What happens in this country is the state officials must give reasons for their decision. Not all or few are capable of articulating sufficient reasons for the decision they make. Okay, half of that is, the other half is corruption. But the decision-making process itself is flawed. I'd like to see those clauses scrapped. That your emphasis mustn't be on reason, must be on the validity of the decision itself, not on the poor decision-making process. Those clauses of the Equality Court has worked very well. It's working now well. You can see some of the cases pending. I tried my best, but in those days, in the early years, there weren't that many Equality Court cases. I was one of the first Equality Court judges. The exciting cases coming up now, not yet. But the other,
Judge,
I must say this, I'm not entirely satisfied with the property clause.
do you want to elaborate, Judge?
You see, what the property clause is section 19, isn't it? Yeah, property 25, yeah. Let me just read you the property clause says. No one may be deprived of property except in terms of law of general application, and no law may permit arbitrary deprivation of property. The property may be expropriated only in terms of law of general application, for public purpose or in the public interest, and subject to compensation. The amount which and the time and manner of payment which would have been agreed to by those affected or decided or approved by a court. Now, my problem is this, subject to compensation. Now, I agree entirely that you should be compensated. Firstly, I'm going to say very clear that you can't be deprived of your house or your home. It doesn't relate to private property holdings like homes and so on. It was never intended to be, that's a bogey. There's a bogey man coming up saying, take away your house. Nobody intends to take away anybody's house. But the compensation clause was interpreted, unfortunately, lawyers are conservative by nature. And the first land claims court in this country, which part of it still exists. The property clause in this country, I mean, distracted what I say.
You were talking about the property clause.
Yeah.
And lawyers being
Yeah, lawyers there. The first, the bench that sat, judge with a long surname, Chinas concurred in the judgment. They interpret compensation to mean compensation in a very complicated way. They interpret to mean in commercial terms. Now, how on earth does one compensate for 300 years of dispossession by giving the person who acquired the land by improper and unethical means the right to compensation in commercial terms? I can understand you have a wine farm, they're going to pay for it. But the way it's been interpreted, the compensation clause, I don't know, it's this all along, is that the court itself sought to protect values. Judges, by their very nature, protect class interests. Judges, I'm middle class. I protect my own interests. The judges protect their own class interests. And this judgment is a particularly bad one, which then said it defines how commercial interest is to be defined. And most of the thinking thereafter has resulted in the state paying enormous amounts of money for compensation, but very little land actually being compensated because the money ran out. Oh. And it's going to be even less money available for constitution. But, but can one actually get land distribution in terms of a constitution? Can you think back in history and see anywhere in the world has land been redistributed against the will of the owner by legal means?
No.
Can anyone think of it? Mm-hmm. The only way land is redistributed is on the back of a revolution. That's the only way land is distributed. Land is only distributed, has only been redistributed on the back of a revolution. Unfortunately, we didn't get to that stage. But luckily we didn't, because it'd been chaos. We didn't want the chaos to prevail in this country. But recognizing that, there should be a serious attempt, central command, to redistribute land efficiently. Now, I lived here in Salt River. It's one of the few areas where people of color could live in the apartheid era. But I couldn't buy a house in Rondebosch, which is around the corner. Better land, better houses, because I had the wrong color. So the people who live there had the advantage of paying a lesser price and a bigger house because of the color of their skin. And the children inherit the house with millions because their parents were advantaged by apartheid. So don't tell me anything about not having gained by iniquities of apartheid. It was widespread. It was a method of distributing wealth to the white people of this country, rich people of this country also. So look here, we're sitting with that problem. I don't think one can get compensation in the way that it's been interpreted by the courts. I think there should be a serious attempt to redistribute land, but also redistribute the wealth of this country. I mean, tell me this, anybody can say this. Can one conceivably move into the future, this country being as unequal as it is? The poor remain poorer, become poorer.
Yeah.
And you can't say, as my good friend, the president says, he's going to bring business to this country. Business is good. But business results in those who own business becoming wealthier. it doesn't amount to begin the process of redistributing wealth. Somebody has to do that.
Yeah.
But there has to be a national interest to do that.
So Judge, we, our president, and we've heard of talk about inclusive growth. What is your view on inclusive growth?
No such thing. How to get included? Capitalism by its nature implies profit. The person who owns the shares wants to make profit. The person who runs the factory wants to make profit. The distributor wants to make profit. It's geared to increase profit. It is not, the system is not geared to redistribute. That can only be done if there's the political will to do that.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the political will, I'm afraid, I won't live long enough to see this, but this country has a serious problem. There are people who understand this. I am in the chat group. I discovered chat groups are very interesting.
Yeah.
And this chat group has 3/4 of the chat groups are retired politicians. And they have all these fancy ideas of how the ANC is failing and why it's failing. But none of them put up an alternative.
Yeah, that's
They don't say
the challenge.
the answer to that is X, Y, and Z. No?
Judge,
They lack the courage to. Somebody else want to ask a question, please. Yes, please.
Judge Desai, Justice Alwisat said a constitution is the autobiography of the nation, and it emerges at moments of profound importance in the life of a nation. Now, if you take that and distill it to legislation is a mirror reflecting a nation's soul. Legislation is basically created by people for their own people. Then there must be in all pieces of legislation warning signs that a country is on its way to human rights atrocities or in the midst of human rights atrocities. In your opinion, what laws or lack of laws in a country's constitution is the warning signs for human rights atrocities?
Yes. Now, thank you very much for that. Albie puts it rather dramatically there to say it's the soul of a nation. I don't think a nation has a soul. If it has a soul, it's locked up in the reserve bank, protected by the police, the courts, and the law. But your question is, which fundamental rights are under threat? There are many. There are many under threat because if one doesn't begin to think in terms of redoing the criminal justice system, you're collapsing the security of this nation. And we can see it by the way the developing events in this country, where judges are floundering, the politicians are floundering, and those who wish of ill will towards the country are dominant. And ill will, I mean, there are many people who actually want the country to fail. I mean, I'm not that category of person, but we can see those people around. And one will be able to counter that. One must acquire both the will and the expertise to take this country forward. Young people, young lawyers can play a wonderful role in doing that. All citizens can play a role in doing that. The other, besides the criminal justice system, there's also the, I'm not sure, whether the fourth generation rights will be given fourth generation rights. What's the point of talking the right to water, right to housing, when citizens do not get them? So, in other words, the over-ambitious nature of this constitution was is its drawback. You know, when this constitution was drafted, we could simply have adopted a national momentum towards water, education, and so on. What we did was we deferred it to the right contained in the constitution. That deflected or blunted the will of the people to create a new nation. I'm putting it in dramatic terms. But I fear that the government of the day was seeking to void the real problems in this country. We need to rebuild this country. We need to rebuild it ground upwards. Education.
Yeah, love to hear your thoughts.
Education.
There, Judge.
Education, the quality of lawyers you get nowadays, because I'm presently, as the legal ombudsman, I'm trying to hire staff. And a lot of the applicants just simply don't make the grade, although they're law graduates. It's the quality of their training. It's the quality of the places they work at. Education in this country has reached a rather poor level. I come from a family of teachers. In fact, before I became a lawyer, I studied to teach English. For other reasons, I then switched course and studied law. But my family has always been involved in education. And in our family hours, we've had this debate several times. One party took the view that Neville Alexander, which you would know, took the view that everybody must be taught in the 9 or 11 languages of the country. I took the view that everybody should be taught English. Reactionary, they labeled me. You see, what about giving effect to the indigenous language? A child learns better in his mother tongue. The rich people send their children to private schools and speak beautiful English. They will be the lawyers and the doctors of the future. The poor children taught in mother tongue education won't be able to compete with them at university level. It's always been my position, but they say I'm wrong. I may be wrong because my sister differs with me. So that's as difficult as you get.
I'm mindful of time. We are 1 minute to 3. I think I'm going to close it.
One last question.
One last question. One last question. I think, anybody have a question? Because I have a.
Yes, please ask your question.
Do you not think it's time for civil society to play a strong
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Do you not think it's now time for civil society to play a stronger role? Because it seems that the politicians and politics and different parties have totally failed us really.
Now, you see, that's a good question, but the civil society and the political society are inseparable. I mean, how do one separate ordinary civil society from political movement? The point is also diversionary, because your civil society doesn't take a political position. You can't just lobby on the basis that I'm a member of the Sultan of the Civic, of which I was a chair for 10 years. You can't develop you must develop on the basis of political vision and an ideology. That can only be done by a political party. But it should draw ordinary citizenship, should participate in the political process. And I have the absolute faith that we did it once before. I never thought that we'd ever see apartheid go. I never thought I'd be a judge. When I was an advocate, all judges were white. They wouldn't ever be sit on that illustrious, but I sat there for 25 years. So, it's the future that is unpredictable, the future that is uncertain. And we must prepare for the future in the interest of all South Africans.
Thank you very much, Judge. That was awesome. Thank you very much for spending the afternoon with us, for sharing your experience and thoughts with us. And we will be eternally grateful.
Okay.
We've got some constitutions that some of our lucky.
No, not my one. My one leather box.
No, you have a very special one. We've got some constitutions. We've had some great questions coming in through the chat, and we look forward to sending those out to you. So thank you very much for spending the afternoon with us and celebrating Human Rights Day with us. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.